After the end of the world on Earth, someone is marking zombies with a W. Hello all. This is Jacobson and this is a brief retelling of the 16th episode of the 5th season of the zombie series The Walking Dead. You can see the previous episodes at the links in the video description. Once this video gets 200 likes, I will release the next installment. Enjoy watching it.
Morgan wakes up in the back seat of a car. He makes himself breakfast and sits down to eat it. Suddenly a man appears with the letter W on his forehead and points a gun at the morgue. They begin a conversation, during which the man tells a story about how the first settlers used the natives to hunt wolves. He also explains that he and his group spend their time moving from settlement to settlement, killing and robbing people along the way, while speaking in a friendly tone. Suddenly, the mood turns gloomy when the man declares his intention to take all of Morgan's possessions, including himself. Morgan replies that he doesn't mind the man taking his things, but refuses to let the man take him away. Suddenly, another man attacks Morgan from behind with a sickle, but Morgan easily evades the attack. He arms himself with his staff and easily defeats both. He offers them to leave, but is attacked again. Then he knocks both unconscious. He puts both men in the back seat of the car and honks several times. Then he takes the rabbit's foot and drives away. Daryl rides down the road on a motorcycle, and Aaron follows him in the car. They stop and get out of the car. Rick wakes up with his face covered in small bandages. Michonne is sitting next to the bed on a chair. Michonne says that Diana put Rick in the room to calm the situation. Glenn, Carol and Abraham enter the room. Carol informs Rick that Diana is holding a meeting that night to decide what to do with Rick. She advises him to tell Dina that he took the gun to keep Jesse safe. Glenn informs Rick that people are now guarding the armory. Rick declares that if the meeting goes badly, he will whistle and they will take Reggie, Diana and Spencer hostage, threatening to cut their throats if they are not given access to the armory. Then he lies down to get some more sleep. Maggie talks to Dina about the upcoming meeting. She reminds Dinah that she has decided to let them all in, reminding her that she is putting Rick's fate in the hands of people who don't know all the sides of this story. She also points out that Rick has seen a lot and lost a lot during the time they spent outside the walls. Deanna objects that Rick pointed a gun at the residents. Maggie objects to her, claiming that he didn't pull the trigger. Reg intervenes and points out how Michonne stopped Rick, but Deanna simply states that she will do what she has to. Maggie leaves, but the speech follows her, telling her that civilization begins when you stop running. You start living together and stop pushing people away, he says, and declares that he will raise this issue at the meeting that night. Meanwhile, Sasha is removing the bodies of the walkers she shot earlier. She throws the corpses into the pit, but suddenly stops. She lies down among the dead walkers and closes her eyes. Daryl notices that not so long ago someone passed by their place. They keep walking when Daryl asks Aaron if they sent people away. 3 people, 2 men and a woman, Aaron answers. He says he thought it would work, but it didn't. He remembers that they drove them far away, took their weapons from them and gave them supplies for the day. He also says he can't repeat the same mistake. Rick will be Carol and hands him a gun and points out that Michonne knocked him out, but Rick assures that Michonne is still an ally. Daryl and Era are watching the man from afar. He smears dirt on his face, which confuses Aaron. Daryl replies that he is doing this to scare away mosquitoes, and they begin to follow the man. Rick leaves the house and walks past Tobin and 2 other men. They greet each other, but Tobin looks at Rick with disbelief. When he passes by Diana's house, they exchange glances, but don't talk to each other. Glenn is sitting outside when Maggie appears and declares that she will try to resolve the situation. Meanwhile, Nicholas is watching Glenn with an evil expression on his face. Then he climbs over the wall, which is why Glenn is watching. Gabriel comes to the gate and says he wants to take a walk. Spencer points out that he has no weapons to defend himself, but Gabriel replies that he only needs the protection of God, and leaves Alexandria. Rick gets home and meets Carl, hugging him and apologizing for his behavior. They talk about the meeting and Rick says he wants Carl to stay at home. So this is home now? He asks. Rick confirms this, but says that in order to make the residents understand that they need Rick and his group, he may have to threaten or even kill one of them. Aaron and Daryl are watching several walkers on the other side of the fence they are standing at. They have lost track of the person they were following. Daryl says they need to find supplies, and knocks on the fence, luring walkers to him. They deal with the walkers and head inside the building. Climbing onto the loading platform, Aaron sees that one of the trucks has an Alaska license plate. Believing that the trailers are full of food, Daryl opens one of them. However, this turns out to be part of an elaborate trap, as a result of a chain reaction, all trailers open, and walkers begin to come out of them, most of which are marked with the letter W. Daryl and Aaron crawl under the trailer and get out from the other side. They deal with several walkers using everything at their disposal, while Aaron is almost captured. They run to a nearby car and close the doors. A few walkers devour the car, but Aaron notices that the glass will last a couple of hours. Carol visits Pete at another house and asks him to check on Tara, but Pete refuses and asks her to leave. She pulls out a knife and declares that she can kill him right at this moment and make it look like Pete attacked her. She suggests Pete to attack her, but he does not attack, feeling indecisive. Then she says that he is weak and that if he plays his cards right, he may not die. Then she hands him the casserole and leaves. Pete drops the casserole and returns to the house. Glenn follows Nicholas behind the walls. He notices a trail of blood and finds a dead walker, after which he hears the crack of a branch. Suddenly Nicholas wounds him in the shoulder and he falls. Nicholas runs to the place where Glenn fell, but finds only a small trace of blood, since Glenn escaped. Rick approaches Jesse's house and finds her standing by a broken window. He tries to talk to her, but she says he should leave. He replies that he wanted to know if she was all right. Before leaving, he says he doesn't regret what he did. He starts to leave, but Jesse stops him. "You were right," she says. When Rick leaves, Pete watches him from another house. Daryl and Aaron stay in the car. Daryl pulls out a knife and offers to take the walkers to give Aaron an opportunity to escape. Aaron, however, disagrees, answering that they will do it together. Just as they are about to leave the car, one of the walkers is suddenly killed by an unknown person outside, which gives Aaron and Daryl the opportunity to get out of the car. It turns out that the man who killed the walker is Morgan. All three engage in a short fight, after which they run to the gate, lock it and separate themselves from the walkers. They introduce themselves and thank Morgan for his help. Aaron starts talking about Alexandria and suggests Morgan go with them. "No, thanks," Morgan replies, says he already has somewhere to go, but he's lost and needs landmarks, and hands Daryl a map. Opening the card, Daryl sees that it is the same card that Abraham left Rick at the church and smiles. Gabriel is walking through the woods when he comes across a walking, devouring man. He holds out his hand to him. "I'm ready," he says, and the walker approaches him. At the last second, he begins to regret his decision and grabs the noose attached to the walker's neck and pulls on it until he beheads the walker. Then he takes a stone and finishes off the walker, smashing his head. He approaches the man who was devoured by the walker, and sees that he is still alive, but barely able to stand on his feet. Gabriel picks up a stone out of mercy and smashes a man's head. Then he breaks down, overcome with guilt and grief. Tara is lying in her bed, Eugene and Rosita are sitting next to her. Abraham enters the room, but when he sees Eugene, he turns around. Rosita stops him, saying that Eugene is asleep. Abraham sits down by Tara's bed, but Rosita intentionally drops some pots and will Eugene. "Good afternoon," he greets dispassionately. He notes that Tara saved him, and also says that Abraham brought them here, after which he apologizes. After a few seconds of reflection, Abraham replies that he is sorry too. Eugene thinks an apology is unnecessary, but Abraham reminds him that he almost killed him. Gabriel returns to Alexandria. Spencer asks Gabriel to close the gate. Gabriel does this, but in his current state of mind only partially, leaving the gate slightly ajar. Nicholas walks through the woods and finds a walker. He shoots him, after which Glenn attacks him. Glenn gains the upper hand, knocking Nicholas to the ground and hitting him on the knee. Nicholas turns the arrows on Glenn, taking advantage of Glenn's bullet wound and pushes his thumb into him. A walker appears and Nicholas runs away, leaving Glenn on the ground with several walkers approaching. Michonne asks Rick if he's ready for the meeting. He admits that he stole a gun from the armory. Michonne says that they will find a way out of this situation, and asks Rick to stay out of trouble. He hands her the gun, but she returns it, wanting him to keep it for himself. She also says she will be with him no matter what, and leaves. Rick puts the gun in his belt and looks out the window. Noticing something outside, he hurries out. He finds the gate still open and notices a trail of blood. After closing the gate, he follows the trail. Sasha visits Gabriel in his chapel. She says she doesn't know what to do and asks if Gabriel can help her. He answers no. Diana and other Alexandrians gather together in the city center. Maggie wants them to wait until Glenn and Rick arrive, but Diana insists they start anyway. She says they will talk about Rick, that he pointed a gun at them, and what he said the day before. Carol replies that they can sort it out. Meanwhile, Rick runs between the houses, looking for signs of walkers. Sasha says she wants to die, but Gabrielle just says she doesn't deserve to be in society. He claims that Bob's injuries and death were caused by her sins. She gets up and asks him to stop, but he continues, remembering Arise and saying that he deserved to die. This becomes the last straw for Sasha, who rushes at him. At the meeting, Michonne is given the floor. She talks about what it's like to live outside Alexandria, and says that Rick just wants his family to survive. Elsewhere, Rick finds several walkers and deals with each of them. Nicholas continues to wander through the forest, trying to get back to Alexandria. Glenn, who survived the encounter with the walkers, appears behind him and knocks him to the ground. Now the floor at the meeting is given to Carol. She explains that Rick saved her life, and says that they need people like him, and that although the events of last night were terrible, they should listen to him. In the chapel, Sasha and Gabriel continue to quarrel, and she hits him with the butt of a gun. Rick struggles with the last walker, pinning him to the ground. He manages to get a gun, and he starts thrusting it into the throat of a walker. In the woods, Glenn brutally beats Nicholas. Abraham explains to the participants of the meeting that there is a huge ocean of shit and that Rick knows everything about it. Rick kills the walker by firing his gun, causing his face to explode, and he is splattered with blood. Two men whom Morgan met earlier stop at the same object that Daryl and Aaron stumbled upon, with them a man in a red poncho, whom Daryl and Aaron were following. One of the men asks him not to move before cutting his throat. "Welcome home," he replies coldly. Maggie tells the group that Herschel respected Rick, and says that Rick is also a father who cares about what he does. She says the band is a family and she won't let it break up. Diana tells the group about Gabriel's visit and says that Rick proved what Gabriel told me about the group by fighting Pete. Maggie leaves. Glenna blames Nicholas for Noah's death, then puts a gun to his forehead. Sasha, knocking Gabriel to the ground, grabs a rifle and aims at him with a crazy expression on his face. Tobin speaks at the meeting, stating that he only wants his family to be safe. He falls silent when a bloodied Rick enters the meeting, carrying the corpse of a walker. He throws it on the ground in front of the whole community. Nicholas begs for his life, finally realizing his mistakes, but not wanting to pay for them with his life. Glenn tries to silence him to make things easier for himself, but eventually gives up and decides not to shoot. Sasha is left with a gun pointed at Gabriel when Maggie enters and convinces Sasha to drop the weapon. Gabrielle says she should have let her kill him, and, breaking down, replies that they died because of me. Rick informs everyone that there were no guards at the gate and that the walkers ventured in themselves. He says that the dead and the living will always try to find their way in. While Rick gives his speech, Judith and Carl listen to the music box. Glenn helps Nicholas return to Alexandria. One of the wolves is looking through photos of the pack that Aaron dropped during their escape. Tara wakes up in her bed, and Sasha, Maggie and Gabriel are praying in the chapel. Rick assures them that they will survive and that he will show them. He also notes that he does not regret what he did, but regrets that he did not tell them about it earlier. Suddenly, a drunken Pete bursts into the meeting, brandishing Michonne's katana. "You're not one of us," he shouts. Reg tries to stop him, but Pete refuses to listen. Then Reg tries to stop Pete physically, but he pushes him away, accidentally cutting his throat with a katana. The Alexandrians scream in shock and horror as Rez falls, bleeding from his throat and mouth, and a confused Diana tries to help him. Reg soon bleeds out and dies in Dina's arms. Diana cries from the bottom of her heart, but her mournful expression soon turns to rage. Rick looks at Dina and she says, "Do it." Without hesitation, he turns around and kills Pete with a shot to the head. Another voice is calling from somewhere far away. Rick looks up and sees Morgan standing in front of him, as well as Daryl and Aaron. They both exchange stunned looks. Later, Michonne prepares to attach her katana back to the wall. Soon she changes her mind, sheathing her katana and equipping it. Later, a man in a red poncho passes by a car with the inscription "Wolves" nearby.